Hello, everybody. Today is our monthly SBDM. It's Monday, May the 18th. This meeting is moved up a little earlier than usual because it typically is the end of the year activities with our graduation week and all that. So this week's SBDM and the board meetings are always during the month of May, moved up a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and begin our meeting now. So at this time, we'll wait for approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I have a question, Mr. Myers. The document that you sent us on the 15th, last Friday, it only has the agenda. There's none of the other.
It didn't have
the other documents.
Okay, I just shared that out with Mrs. Bush. I can go ahead and send that out there. Everybody right now, does everybody need me to do that?
Yes, please.
Other than that, I'll second.
I had the same issue, I'm sorry. I had the same issue, Mr. Campbell. I couldn't find anything but the agenda either. That's why I asked for it a few minutes ago.
We're reading the agenda.
I'm getting ready to send the whole thing to you here, Sue. So. Okay, it's been sent. Have you received it?
Have not yet. Somebody got it. There we go.
Ooh.
Okay. All right. I got it.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay. We have a motion and a second. I think we're good to vote.
Are we ready to approve today's agenda?
Yeah, we're working on the minutes now.
Did you need somebody to second the agenda?
Yeah.
I will.
All right. So at this time, then we're looking for approval of the April minutes. So I'll give everybody an opportunity to review those before we move on.
If everybody's had an opportunity to read, I'll make a motion to accept the April minutes.
I'll second it.
Okay. I'll go ahead then and share the good news for good news report. I will start off by just saying the number one, that we have completed NTI. I know that was a very much new for everybody here, and I really want to express my gratitude first to our staff for adjusting, the flexibility, adaptability, the growth mindset that they all showed, and just really going above and beyond to reach our students. And so for that, I'm really appreciative of our staff, for our students, for doing what we asked. There's a lot of positives came out of it. Certainly, this is not effective for everybody, but it was very interesting to see some of the kids that you wouldn't expect. And I always like to look at for the positives there, and certainly there was quite a few surprises in terms of kids that you would think that might have struggled and not done so well during the NTI, that really kind of shined. So it just kind of reinforced the belief in me that there's always you never can underestimate kids, and there is a way for each child to learn, and each child sometimes does things a little differently. And so some of them really shined during this. and some of them struggled. So I think that's, got to point both out there. But certainly some of them did very, very well. I will share that we had our school turn in device and pick up belongings from the lockers this past Thursday and Friday. And of course, we had that scheduled for outside, and then we with the threat of weather and all that, we ended up having to move it in here, but we adapted, and that went exceedingly well. Quite honestly, I was very, very pleased with that. I think in talking to Casey, I don't have the final numbers, but we're up about 83 in that range % of devices at this point that have been turned back in, which is really good. And we're still getting some trickling in here and there. Just today with some of the seniors coming down, we picked up a couple. We have a few kids that we know that have some different circumstances that have some devices out there, and then we're in the process of trying to go out and retrieve the rest of them. So I thought that was pretty good for pretty good turnout, and so we were pleased with that. Now we'll have to do the leg work of going and trying to collect the rest. So it's a process, but we're off to a very good start. I will say I'm very pleased with as the site-based committee here knows, with our hiring for next year. As of right now, we have completed our hiring. Very excited about the new staff members that will be joining us. We have a variety in terms of some experience. We have one teacher with 15 years experience. We have another teacher coming in with 8 that's nationally board certified. And then we have some first-year teachers. So we have an interesting mix. Each of them brings some great qualities and characteristics, and just excited to welcome them on board. It's sad to see some of the staff members that we did lose, who were excellent teachers. So we were fortunate to be able to find good teachers for our kids for next year, and we're excited about bringing them on board. So I thought I would mention that. I will say today that the pictures and video that was set up in the gymnasium has gone very, very well. Very excited about that. We have a total of 51 kids that signed up for that. And when you take into consideration, we have a total of 61 kids, and I'll get to the graduate numbers a little bit later, but that's a high turnout. We had I stopped at 3 o'clock to come over here and prepare for this. We have a break between 3 and 3:30 scheduled for the picture and video. As of when I left, we had 19 out of 21 students that had been here that had taken care of that. It's gone very well. The pictures are looking great, and the video that's going to come along with it. So I'm pleased about that. I do want to say that we have the celebratory parade that's going to be coming up next Friday, the 29th. Excited about that, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be a very fun activity for our kids and for the community, and looking forward to that as well. So those are the positive news that I have to share.
All good stuff.
All good stuff. Anybody have anything to add? Nope. Okay. I'm going to go ahead. We'll open up now to public comment. I'll wait on Mr. Woods if we have many out there. He's okay. Thank you, Mr. Woods. Next, we'll go ahead and move on to our student achievement report data. So what I thought I would share for this month is the graduate, what the numbers look like for graduation. We have 61 students in the graduating class. As of right now, we feel we're going to have 57 students who will graduate. That's a percentage of 93% for your graduate. We have one more student that's a possibility. So I think a high number for us would be a 95, which would be very good. Obviously, we always strive to be at 100. Keep in mind that the state average is 91, so we want to make sure we're above that mark. If we can finish with 58, which we have 2 more students, or one should finish tonight, another one we have a possibility of completing. So feel like our final number will be 58. Pretty certain we'll end up being 58, 57 or 58. Let me say that. So at 93 or 95, so that's a pretty good number. I will throw out there that we have one student who earns an alternative certification. So right off the bat, we lose 2% there. We won't get into the debate or discussion there, but just so everybody understands that. So we cannot, even before the year starts, there's no possibility of us being at 100%. We've talked about that before. And then there are some extenuating circumstances for one of the other students. We'll just leave it at that. So one student that is not going to complete is going to fall short, but everybody that was the possibility, excluding probably one, is going to be a graduate this year, and that goes to a lot of hard work. Number one, from the students, and number two, from our staff. Like I said earlier, referenced earlier, it's just impressive and so gratifying to see how much our staff cares about our kids and how hard they work to try to make sure that they achieve their goals. And then for some of these kids, the odds that they've overcome to get to this point, we should never take for granted. So kudos, number one, to the students, and also to our staff for making it possible. So very pleased with that. And we'll certainly have the final numbers. See, the numbers can change going up to June the 12th here. So I'll probably come back and the June report and give you the final number tally. Any questions on the student achievement report? No? Okay. I'm going to make a motion to kind of adjust the agenda here a little bit because I know we have some guests here today. Last month we had discussion over the grading policy. So instead of making them have to wait around like we did last time, I thought we just would make a motion to adjust the agenda so that we could have our discuss or update our grading policy. Is that okay? All right, I'll let Mr. Wright lead at this time.
All right, so last month the committee, who has been getting together since January, kind of led a discussion of some of the things that they were proposing to potentially alter within our grading policy. And I think at this time it would be appropriate to begin a discussion as a council as far as how we want to proceed with that information. Remember that anytime that there's a site-based committee, their job, what they're tasked with, is making recommendations, but ultimately the council will vote and make any sort of changes. So. Did everyone love every single part of it? Did you hate everything? A lot of silence.
Are you going to start with like a certain section? Are we going to like look at it section by section, or are you just looking for an overall approval for everything that was presented?
So we literally all of the above can happen. I'm more than happy to start throwing sections out. If anyone feels particularly strong about one section, I'm trying to get everything pulled up right now.
If it's okay, I'd like to make a quick comment about formative and summative assessments. Based on the recommendations of the committee, I personally agree. I like the idea of giving some more weight to formative assessments and shifting to a 60-40 so that there's more emphasis on formative leading up to those summatives, so we know where kids are because they're taking it a little bit more seriously and turning in all the formatives. I know that we had a discussion about, I'm trying to think how we had addressed it last time, about points versus percentages. And there was some concern about teacher autonomy. I think there's definitely some some room for flexibility there to give teachers some more autonomy as far as how many points things are worth versus everything being worth 100%. Anybody has any comments on that?
Personally, at first, I was a little bit confused on how it worked, but I think after I went through it with Mr. Byrd, I kind of agree with it as well. I mean, not all formatives are alike, and I feel like we should be able to represent that.
I am still against the points. Just because, and I understand why and like not wanting to, but just by comparing apples to apples, I had a mistake on my Infinite Campus, and I had the grades for all of my students in that class, and then it was set to points, and what hadn't posted compared to with the new posted were different by letter grades. And so I respect it. I understand why, not wanting to, wanting OAs and things to count less. I just don't think it's even Steven. That's my 2 cents.
How do you feel about the percentage 60-40 instead of 70-30, Aaron?
Totally good with that.
I'm good with that as well. The only thing is I feel like we have to include the 20% midterm and final exam as a part of that. I don't think we should just switch to 60-40 just for that sake alone, but I think going to 60-40 with the addition of adding the 20% midterm and final would be what I would be in favor of.
My only concern.
I was just going to further the conversation on the midterm and final and where everyone else felt on the 20%.
Oh, for the midterm and final? I'm fine with that because that's, I know Mr. Bird had mentioned that by doing that, it kind of comes back to the 70-30. So I don't think.
I think it really makes it, essentially your semester ends up being closer to 68-32 was what, assuming that we're counting a final or midterm as if it's a summative, which it should be. Then it ends up more of a 68-32. So it kind of takes us back to square one, but it puts more of an emphasis on the front end on the formative assessments.
I like that. I would propose keeping that. I was trying to pull up the current one. Should we just like start rewriting out what we had? Like, what would be the most efficient way?
So the most efficient way would be that we decide, or not we, you decide what you actually want to, essentially what you want to approve as a council, and then we can rewrite it between this meeting and next meeting and actually get to a first reading next time, and then finalize it the following time with the second reading.
Okay.
If you guys have the grading policy, like the Google Doc pulled up at the very bottom, it lists every policy that's currently in place that would be affected in some way that would have to be tweaked or rewritten.
Beth, where is that? That's what I was looking for in my email and I couldn't find it.
I can shoot it back out.
It's in the agenda that Mr. Myers just sent out. It's toward the back.
Okay. Let me pull that back up.
It's like the very last thing. It says changes will affect policies and requiring the following, and it has a list of every policy that it would have to either amend or tweak a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My only concern with the 20% for well, I have two concerns with the 20% for midterm and final. Number one, my concern is we have, I don't know how many people are aware, but we have a large percentage of students, larger than you would think, of students who have diagnosed anxiety disorders, along with students with special needs who may be affected by things like test anxiety. So putting an exorbitantly large emphasis on a midterm or final exam puts a lot of stress on them for a one-off event, which I feel like a lot of us have fought against as educators as far as state testing being a one-off that seems to have more weight than it's worth. So while I understand the suggestion, I just personally have some concerns based on the students that I've worked with in the past and students that I see in our population. I always want to try to do what's best for students and what's going to increase their achievement and have them be best prepared, at the end of high school. And I just worry about the stress involved in that and how that is going to affect their grades and things like freshman failure rate and graduation rate long term. The other concern is that I didn't see anything. I didn't get a chance to go through all the policies that Beth said at the bottom of the document might be affected in some way. But I really want us to think long and hard about the current policy we have in place about college readiness. Kids who are, I believe it's college or career ready, who have an A for the course by the time midterms or finals come up, are exempt from those currently as an incentive to try to reach college and career readiness as early as possible and not waiting till the last minute on those things and giving them a further incentive for that. So I wanted to put my support behind keeping that in place, because I do feel like if students demonstrated mastery up to that point, that should still be an incentive that's available, in my opinion. But I'm open to your guys' thoughts about, 20% exams and the policy regarding college and career readiness.
And I think people from the committee could disagree with me if they don't think it was their experience, but I felt like that was some of the feedback that we got from a number of schools, was that that was one of the ways that students could be exempt from their exams. Students who had similar 20% semester and final exams could be exempt through college career readiness, and then there generally was some sort of a grade tied to that as well. A kid couldn't be failing for the semester and get to be exempt just because they're college or career ready.
And that was one of the conversations we had on the committee, is we would still like to possibly see that in place, because if we do the 60-40 and exempt a kid from the exam, their 60-40 would be their grade. As far as their exam would not count, but their summatives already proved that they knew the knowledge. The exam was a way to reteach and retest, so they wouldn't need it. That's why that 40-60 would still impact them, because they've already proven they know the information.
So how would it work for the student who did well throughout the semester, but then did poorly on your midterm or final? Because those are typically not things that can be retaken or reworked. And I think the discussion that we had when that kind of originally changed was how that could fail a kid who was doing fairly well throughout the year, but bombed because they did terrible on one test. How do we accommodate those type of children?
Well, and Mr. Burke can correct me if I'm wrong, but when we were doing the math, it would be very hard for a kid who did all the formatives, took advantage of the retesting for the summatives throughout the quarter, to actually bomb and fail because of the midterm, just the way the numbers went. So if a kid was doing what they were supposed to be doing the formatives, retaking summatives if needed, and preparing all quarter long, chances are their grade would be high enough not to bomb them or fail them just because of a 20% midterm.
I do think one of the things that we have going in our favor is with our particular grading scale, and it's 60 up being passing. Say, for instance, a kid was doing fairly well. They're not knocking out of the park, but they have an 80 for the semester. Theoretically, that kid could get a 0, and they're going to drop to a D, but they still would pass for the quarter. Now, if we have any kid in our school getting a 0 on a midterm or final exam, we have real problems and we need to have conversations about what's going on. So that's the most extreme hypothetical that really shouldn't happen. In my experience at another school who did have a 20% midterm and final, it wasn't too dramatic of a change either to help or hurt kids' grades. Kids generally would kind of score wherever they were at the semester anyway.
So my question would be, what about that student who falls in the category that has, let's say, a low C average, or they're in that D range? So we know we have a percentage of students who ride that fence like that, and they go and they take a final and they get in the 40s. Is that student now going to fail? And I think that's something we have to just have a conversation about, because to me, and I'm not saying I'm against that at all, I'm just saying that's the possibility, because we certainly have students that fall in that category that are kind of riding the fence, that are close.
Mathematically, if you're in the low 70s and got a 40, you'd still be right on that 60% line to pass for the semester.
But my question is, what are we?
I was just saying, like I said, from my experience, that's normally not the case. Kids almost always kind of fall right where they are for the rest of the semester. It really, in my experience, doesn't change it dramatically. But that very much could happen, certainly.
I think other things I thought about during this conversation, in years past, kids who didn't pass the first semester, we had net falls for them. We'd moved them into online learning classes. We gave them other opportunities to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. So if they're hanging on by their toenails with a 60% and they fail their midterm, there's still there has been in the past other ways for them to prove themselves and not fail for the year. So those other net falls that we already include help a lot.
My question, I guess, is just... Go ahead, Mr. Campbell.
I was just going to say one other thing is that the proposed policy does provide for alternate assessments. So if you have a student who has severe anxiety and approaches the teacher does have that option to give them some sort of alternate assignment that would perhaps be less anxiety.
I saw like projects and stuff.
Yeah.
I was reading that.
Go ahead, Ms. Bushley.
My question is just, I'm just curious what the committee felt like the ultimate goal of giving so much more weight to the midterm and final was. What were we hoping to accomplish by doing that, so that I know the mindset?
So we had a couple different things with that. Beth, and I think Matt's on here too, help me. But one of the things we talked about was, as a school, we already put a big emphasis on the midterm and finals by giving it a 2-hour time slot in our schedule and redoing our schedule for it. And so some teachers felt that because we already are putting that we're already making it be essentially more important, but it's not in the grade book more important. So just to even that out of that mentality and that mindset out a little bit better. And then after talking with kids who have graduated and moved on to college, they felt that they needed a little bit more of a practice, I guess, for how college life really is. And in college, your midterms and finals and a lot of classes hold a lot of weight, and helping kids study and just putting more of an emphasis and raising that bar that we always talk about raising. Help me out with some of the other things I'm kind of forgetting.
We also talked about how for most classes, I can't say all, I can speak on behalf of mine. In the middle school, I use the last 3 days to review. So they have 3 hours to do a study guide, a review, for me to reteach in small groups, any of that material that's going to be on that midterm or final. And a lot of kids weren't taking advantage of that because it was just the same weight as another summative. It didn't matter to them as much because they already had 3 summatives in the grade book. this one was going to be bigger and more questions, but it didn't matter because it was just weighted as the same summative. So I don't know. Me personally, I thought the midterm and summative or midterm and final was very important because my kids aren't tested till the 8th grade. So they're supposed to retain everything from 7th grade and 8th grade. Without me retesting them on a quarterly or semester rate, I don't know what they've retained when that big K-Prep test does come along.
I just want to make a comment based on what Ms. Kors was talking about with students who had gone off to college and may or may not have been successful. And I guess several of them had told some people in the committee from what they told us last month that they felt like they weren't adequately prepared. I had a lot of questions in my head about that comment after our meeting last month because a lot of the students who had gone to college after graduation were also students who had attended college courses at Gateway during their junior and senior years. And those kids who are attending those college courses at Gateway already are being exposed to those tougher requirements at the college level. So I have a hard time, no offense to anyone involved, but I have a hard time believing that their struggles with transition to post-secondary education were by and large a result of not being well prepared while they were at Dayton, because they had the opportunity to see those college policies and feel them out and experience them for some of them 4 semesters before they went to college. So I'm not really sure how much that truly affects our kids' success at the college level. And I mean, the way that I feel about it, kids are going to be successful in post-secondary education if they're well prepared with the content, if they have the background knowledge necessary. And I think there are a lot of things that go into that transition above and beyond a grading policy at their high school that may contribute to their success or not at the college level. But I just wanted to put out there, I kept thinking a lot of those kids already had exposure to the college grading policy before they got there. So I'm curious how that affected their success at the post-secondary level when they'd already had that college experience.
And I would agree with you. A lot of those kids did have that experience. I know a few of my softball players who went on to college did not have that experience. They did not make the grades at Dayton in order to take part in those classes, but are finding ways to be successful in college. And those are the kids that I specifically spoke to. So those couple girls had no experience with midterm weights and deadlines and assignments due at specific times. So you're right. A large majority of kids did get exposed to that. But some of our kids who are beating the system as far as like they weren't seen as a college student went on to college, and that's where they're struggling.
Yeah, and I also, just from my own kids' personal experience, like while I mean Kylie's going to classes through NKU and Gateway herself, and while it is a little bit of a college thing, it's not quite the same as college. Like it is higher end than high school. I'm not saying that, but it's not quite at the college level either. They're very flexible with the high school kids. So while they get a good taste of that, I don't think they were given a full taste of that with having a full college course load. And just the couple kids that I've talked to.
But I think
and in that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Beth.
No, you go. Go ahead.
What I hear you saying from that is that even the colleges are seeing that maybe high school kids need some more flexibility. So if even the colleges are saying that kids need some flexibility to have that room to grow as far as grading policies, then I feel like why shouldn't we? If it's in the best interest of the student and if it's getting them closer to being able to master content.
I just feel like we should, if after looking at all of the grading policies around all of the schools in our area, and last month we talked about making an even playing field, especially with like GPAs and things. All these schools that we looked at, which all had pretty much the same grading policies, we were the outlier. So if we want to even the playing field for our kids, I feel like we need to even that bar that is set also in different areas.
Well, and when we look, for those of us who've been at Dayton for a long time, I was digging through some old data to try to figure out how did we get to this point. And I like to try to make decisions as much as possible based on data. And I did. I read, I highlighted, I color coded everything that you sent me scores and looked at all the different schools that you had sent us. I know that a few of those schools, to be honest, I pulled current Kentucky State Education Report cards for those schools. And for several of those schools that were sent, we outperformed them. And for the schools that we don't outperform, I think if you look at those schools, they're dealing with slightly different challenges and obstacles to kids than we are. When I look back over the data of how we came to the grading policy years back, we looked at when we were a persistently low achieving school and suggestions from the state of Kentucky Department of Ed and how we could try to make things better for our kids and pull up achievement. When we looked at the data after moving from a PLA school to a distinguished school, there were three basic things that had changed. We had 10 for 10s every week for every class that were timed to increase ACT scores to get kids used to the pacing on the ACT. Some teachers still do those, some don't. The reteach, retake policy to try to increase student mastery and make sure that we were individualizing and addressing what kids specifically needed in order to master content. And then the third thing was Friday school, which we also don't do anymore. So I feel like one of the few hangers on from the data that we have to show how did we go from PLA to distinguished is this reteach, retake policy that takes into account what our kids' needs are, meets them where they are, and tries to make sure that they're getting access to content despite the obstacles. So I just wanted to point that out because I did do a lot of research. You guys have really made me think, and I appreciate your input. And I just want to make sure that, you know, whatever we decide, we would decide based on data and based on what's best for kids and based on what we see has been successful in the past.
Especially, do you remember what was the policy regarding finals and midterms, like during that PLA status time, or like right when the state started to enter the building?
We were currently, there was no way for kids to get out of them. There was no exemption for exams, and they were at, I can't remember if it was 10 or 15%. I'll have to dig through my paperwork, but midterms and finals were
heavier than everything else.
I think 15% back when we were a PLA school.
And then it just went to a regular test.
Right, and the thought process behind that was that summative exams were being more heavily weighted anyway. Right, so there were some teachers who did things based on points, and there were some teachers who did things based on percentages. It was very differentiated across different classrooms, had different policies.
That was a parent concern.
Summative,
getting report cards that were all like different.
Right, and then summatives held the same weight as everything else except for midterms and finals. So the thought process when we initially did the new grading policy, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, whenever we started this, was that if we removed that 15% weight on midterms and finals, they would still be more heavily weighted as summatives because of the 70-30 split.
One of the things, and this is more of a clerical thing than anything, if you decide to go back to a percentage emphasis on midterms and finals, it could be set up in IC to where that was its own grading category. It was its own grading task, to where it completely kept it away from all other summatives, to where theoretically there should be more uniformity, and it really shouldn't be as unbalanced as what it sounds like it was in the past.
Well, I kind of want to see an example. I know you had mentioned, Mr. Wright, that you personally didn't notice a big change as far as a midterm wasn't going to like drop your grade by 2 grades. But I'm curious, in my head, I'm trying to imagine what this looks like in Infinite Campus.
So it's so you would have your first quarter and second quarter would be your normal term grades,
right,
if you're calculating your semester, and then there would be a separate semester exam grade. So all that, and this would be on Miss Erdman's, and she would set up for a semester grade. It would be 40% quarter, 40% quarter, 20% semester exam. So the task would be completely separate. You would just go in and put in a grade for that task, just like you were putting in grades for a quarter grade.
Okay.
So it's literally, you go in, you set up one assignment, it's semester exam, 100 points or 100 percentage points, and then what they scored on it.
Mr. Bird, do you have any of the numbers that, like, examples when you were running the numbers?
Really, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we looked at a student that, let's say, between the first and second quarter, they're averaging, an 80% for the first quarter and an 80% for the second quarter. If they scored a 60 on that midterm, then their semester average would be approximately a 72%. So it didn't completely, annihilate their grade, but it did show that at this point in time, they do not know the knowledge that they previously knew. So it's I feel, more accurate reflection of their knowledge at that point in time. It doesn't vary a lot. If a kid has 100% in both quarters and they get a 50 on the final, yes, that's going to change them quite a bit more because that's farther from their average. But any kid that's in the 70, 80, 90 range and they score between a 50 or higher, we're not talking a super drastic change in their grade, where I think it's mathematically inappropriate or anything like that.
And I think something else that is important to know, like when we were a PLA school, we had no incentives for our hiring kids. So they were bombing those midterms and finals because there was no incentive. We've now added a lot of incentives for our hiring kids, or even our middle of the road kids, to improve. And I think that's part of the battle, is to present it in a way at the beginning of the year that there is some importance on that midterm and final grade, and kids, I think, will prepare themselves better. We're assuming that they'll just slack off like they have been. And I think for a lot of kids who are, I call them on the bubble, kids who could go one way or the other, if they know the expectation and we raise the bar, they will meet that bar if it's there. When we were a PLA school, there was no, what's the value on the midterm and final, even though it was 15% of their grade or 10% of their grade. Throughout the year, we did not reward or honor those kids who were doing their job on a daily basis. And I think some of that turned around when we did implement 10 for 10s. They were seeing success on a weekly basis, or also if those Swiss reports we used to use, that also gave them some incentive because they were getting rewarded by Miss Chan on a weekly basis. So we can't just like isolate one piece from the other. I think no matter what we institute, as long as we instill it from the beginning of the year on, the expectations there, the kids will rise to that. And I think another important piece is to have teachers on board to make sure that the week of finals and midterms, there's an allotted amount of time set aside for kids to ask questions and review and have study guides, to know what information they have retained throughout the year. Which would mean that would have to be probably a cumulative grade of some sort, a cumulative test of some sort, or project. So in the interest of time,
with the midterm and final exam proposals. Would anyone object to putting that in the language of the policy for the next meeting? And then at that point, we can start to go into actual readings, and we can even bring it, obviously the second reading is when we would have a full vote, but we could continue any parts of that discussion or bring up anything that comes up in the next month at that point. Would anyone object to that?
Are you talking about going ahead and putting 20% midterm and final weights into the policy? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm talking about continuing our discussion on it next time. So I'm not saying that would be final whatsoever. It still ultimately is going to have to be voted on and could be amended further next time.
I'm fine with that.
I guess what I'm proposing, Ms. Bushley, is to put it into the language, and then we can continue to have this discussion that we've been having, but not necessarily making a decision on it tonight.
They're wanting to write a draft policy.
I'm sorry?
Is it
I said-
possible?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Ms.
Kimball.
Fox.
I was gonna say,
After you.
At the very end of that, all the documentation, Mrs. Fields she had mentioned the different policies that would have to be altered. Can that be addressed as well on how they want that altered and what that would look like in that reading?
Yeah, so that's actually exactly what I'm saying, is that Mr. Myers and I in the next month, and Mr. Wolf would work with us to get the language from the proposal into the potential policies, and then we could work on the policies. And at that point, you're still 100% have the opportunity to just strike it down completely. Nothing is set in stone. Nothing's being voted on tonight, and nothing is finalized until the vote on the second reading.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we haven't discussed at all.
And sorry, Mr. Myers. The only reason we can continue this discussion by all means. I'm just trying to be. I'm just trying to look out for everyone's time, since our last meeting went 2.5 hours. But if we want to do that, I have no plans. So, I can certainly sit here all night. I'm just trying to look out for everyone.
I think we've pretty much spoken on. I mean, we've talked about the midterms and finals. We've touched on the formative and summatives. We've made progress there. We've talked about the grade book setup. And I'm just going down the list of things that the committee shared. I haven't heard discussion on, and this is one of the things I've heard a lot, and I know we've all discussed a lot from the, from staff has brought this to the PLCs repeatedly, and conversations come up multiple times, and students as well as parents. What are our thoughts with late work here? I'm looking at the managing student work at the bottom of page 1 in terms of late work, deadlines, because those are kind of the buzzwords that we hear repeatedly. So just kind of want to have I want to respect everybody's time as well, but I think that we would be remiss if we didn't take the opportunity to at least start to share thoughts on that before we do anything next month. So I'll kind of sit back and be happy to listen to our committee members share their thoughts, and certainly from our site base as well. But I do think we need to kind of have some conversation about that at this point.
I think we do. And since Mr. Wright has nothing else to do the rest of the night, I was just
The attic's hot, Mr. Wright, isn't it? Is that what it is?
I'm sorry.
Is the attic hot up there or something?
It's kind of a cool, rainy night, so I'm good. It's much cooler than my office, which is clocking in at 80 right now.
Yeah.
I just am trying trying to take notes, and I just want to make sure that I am getting things to understand. So why the 20% on? It's because my first question, is it because it's cumulative, because it's more info? Like I could write that down as a why the 20%. Would that be kind of like what you were saying, Beth?
Yes, that was one of the reasons.
Because
why.
it's more info. Also, these words might not be appropriate, but as a way to enforce them to work harder, almost a scare tactic to make them work harder. If it counts more, then the idea is that that the idea would be that students would study. Is that another reason? Because I just want to write down what you guys are giving.
I wouldn't say it's a scare tactic. I guess as long as I've been at Dayton, we've put 2 hours aside for every exam and midterm. If you give somebody a 2-hour block, but you only give them a summative test that takes 40 minutes, I guess me personally, I'm not trying to scare them, but I need to know what they know so that when I prepare for K-Prep, I know what to reteach them again. So midterms and finals are a way to reteach, like the first half of the year would be your midterm. And then at the end, towards the end of the year, I could figure out what they know in 7th grade to reteach them for 8th grade, because that's when they're tested in social studies specifically. I'm just talking in my subject.
And I get that, because I do a very similar thing to you. I'm just trying to understand what the 2-hour time limit, what does that really mean to it being 20%? Because it's going to be a longer test, because you're going to have projects and you need more time. Like there's lots of things I can do in that 2 hours.
I think that's a lot of it, is that if it is a cumulative, if we are really trying to see what knowledge and content they have retained or mastered or understand at a deeper level, and we've given them those days in that week to ask questions, do a study guide, refresh their memory, do mini lessons. And then we say, oh, by the way, it's just the same amount of percentage points as a regular unit test. Some kids don't find value in that because the other unit tests outweigh it. So there was a lot of children I know in the middle school, I heard conversations that were like, well, I don't really care exactly how I did because I could fail this and I already have 2 summatives. The worst I could do is a C.
So maybe instead that should be written like, in order to make students care more about it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I would, to care and also to prepare them. Like, we know that the state is going to continue to test the crud out of our kids. We know that. What long-term test are we giving them that make them focus and it's worth a grade? Because we give them case tests, we give them what is the high school cert test. But what tests are we giving them that we say, this is your grade, this is part of what you keep? Has nothing to do with the school's numbers, it's your number.
And if you're hung up on the 20%, we picked 20% because that would bring the grades closer to the 70-30 that we already did. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 20% per se, but we thought it needed to be worth more than a typical summative grade because teachers are putting in and preparing a lot more for it. Students essentially should be putting in a lot more time and preparing more for it. As a school, we already say it's worth a lot more because we give the time for it. So the 20%, if the number is what you're hooked up on, we picked the 20% based on the 70-30.
I'm not looking at a number. I'm just trying to get both sides of the story. And then if that, so whatever it is, by saying that it's worth more than. And then Ms. Bushley, the counter side is that, well, you're still proving retained information. It's still basically a summative. It's still showing knowledge.
Yeah, I just feel like if the reason I thought we were giving 2 hours is because ideally it is a cumulative exam, and I'm not sure how giving it more weight in the grade book gives you different information. If giving them a cumulative exam is going to give you certain information about where you need to fill holes before state testing happens, I'm not sure how that information that you're going to glean from that exam changes based on giving it more weight. I was under the impression that the longer time was because it was more material and was going to take longer to give.
And also another thing is, like, with our students or with our teacher surveys that we came in, we said 75% of our staff, or roughly about that, I'm not exactly sure on the number, said we felt like it was more of a will versus skill thing with our kids. And we said the cumulative finals, the will wasn't there to put in the work because it's such a gigantic bunch of information. So if you make it worth a little bit more, then maybe you'll get that will with some of our kids, especially our higher end kids, because you put a little bit more pressure on it. The will is more there, so we can see what the skill is.
Right.
So
So
are
what
you
we're
saying,
talking about is a motivation issue, and I'm concerned that we're trying to motivate kids by pressuring them or scaring them, and the research on motivation just doesn't really pan out for that is my concern. I agree we have a motivation issue, and I'm not sure how to address it, but I'm not sure. I don't know. I just don't know if this is the way or not, but I'm definitely open to suggest.
Yeah. And I think also once you have 2 summatives in the grade book, and that's where I come back to. I have 2 unit summatives of 2 different topics. And then I have, or 3, and then I'll have my midterm exam that is supposed to show me what kids actually know or retained. Again, they can fail that because it doesn't affect, they already have 2 other summatives that are outweighing it, that are going to bring their score barely lower than what it already is. So it doesn't, I guess I have a hard time seeing kids put in extra work to tell me what they really know on a cumulative test when they know it's weighted the same way as a unit test that had 20 questions.
so are you saying that your higher performing students aren't giving effort on their midterm and final exams? Is that what you're saying?
Some of them are not. That is true. They'll say I have a B, a high B. They'll do the number work. They'll say I have 3 summatives in the grade book. I have a high B. If I don't pass this or I don't feel like doing the 2-page study guide for this cumulative test, it's still only going to take me to a high C or a low B. Now, is that a lot of kids? No, that's the outliers. Like there was probably 5 kids in my honors class that did none of their review because they were like, I'm good with it. Even if I get a 58 by guessing, it's not going to drop my grade because I have 2 other or 3 other summatives already in the grade book.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I was just trying to get, I didn't want to beat a dead horse, but.
Well, I do see a few benefits. I do see a few benefits to it. I believe that part of learning is retention. I think this is a good opportunity for students to prove that they have retained things. And we're spending a lot of time talking about kids who are trying to find ways out of a midterm or final exam, but this would actually give students a really good opportunity for a second try on content. If they had failed it in the first place, went back and relearned it, this would be a really good opportunity to boost their grade. Conversely, if they needed that. And the second thing, and I believe somebody already mentioned this, but it does create a little bit more of a high stakes exam where that pressure of taking an exam is practice for them for when they take very important tests later, like the ACT. But then, alternatively, if a student does have anxiety, like is mentioned earlier, there is flexibility to work around that. So they can still prove their knowledge without hopefully getting the anxiety of the high pressure exam.
Anything else on the exam portion?
No, I just wanted to ask a question about the managing student work, late work that Mr. Myers was just asking about. I know that last year around this time, in preparation for the beginning of this current school year that we just ended, a committee similar to this made suggestions. Lots of people showed up at meetings, and we made some significant changes to the structure of how reteaching and retaking assessments and turning things in after the fact would be handled. And maybe I missed it, but I really haven't seen or heard any feedback from those changes before talking about making even further changes. So I would really like to know how the contracting and giving the teacher more autonomy to make adjustments to how kids are assessed and what assignments they're going to do. I would like to know how that went, see some data on that so that we can then make some intelligent choices about other modifications that need to be made going forward. But I just hadn't heard anything yet.
I can speak to that. I used the retake contract this entire year with every class. And initially at the beginning of the year, I would say the number of retakes was approximately the same, the frequency. But as the kids realized that it wasn't just going to be the same exact test, it was more likely going to be a short answer version instead of multiple choice, or more open-ended instead of even short answer type questions. They began to take the initial test more seriously. And I would say this year I probably had a lower number of test retakes than any other year cumulatively. And I think it's because they just wanted to pass it the first time and not have to take that much more involved version and come after school and do their reteach with me. And plus they didn't like me calling their parents and telling them that they failed a test every time. They did not like that at all. So that's my experience with it.
I had a very similar experience as well. The beginning of the year, kids didn't really know what to expect. And they did not like having to complete certain steps in order to prove that they had relearned the content, even though they were the ones that chose the steps they would take. They didn't like having to do that. And as the year went on, I had less and less students retake exams. And I think in the third quarter, I'm not sure that I had more than 5 students retake an exam the entire quarter, because they wanted to try and complete it right the first time.
So I have 2 questions about that then. One, has anybody compared student to student from prior to our current changes to our current changes to see basically, did that help the child, or did the child not taking it still do poorly? You know what I'm saying? Like, because they were able to retake, their grade were higher the year before than last year because they just stopped taking it, or were their grades similar? And then my other question is, if we've had some positive feedback and it's only been a year, what is failing with what we're currently doing that we feel like we need to make additional changes without a little bit more time to see how that goes?
The contract, I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, was for summatives mostly, and at least that's how I used it, was for summatives. And if the late work, sometimes if kids would actually do the work ahead of time instead of working backwards from the summative, seeing how they do, and then trying to make up some of the late work, they would have done better the first time already. So I guess they're 2 different things. So I agree with Angie. Like, I do think the contracts worked a lot better. It encouraged kids to do better the first time around, then come back and do it a second time. But when we're talking about formative grades, like daily classwork and class participation, if we put some emphasis on that, just like the contract itself now is a loop that the kids have to jump through in order to want to better themselves. If we're not giving any deterrent for late formative work, we aren't giving them an opportunity to try and pull themselves back up as well. So I think they're sort of one and the same, just talking about 2 different types of assessment.
I don't have it actually pulled up in front of me right now, but I don't remember talking about changing the summative things at all. I think the only thing we talked about with the summative assignments was for kids that were being suspended, but I don't recall us wanting to change the way we retake summatives. Like, we left that in there to my knowledge, but I don't have it right in front of me, so I don't know.
It seems to me that we're coming closer together here in terms of the summatives, the reteach, retake last year, the contract. So far tonight, it seems like people felt like that was a good step for us.
Mhm.
That seems to be the consensus. I would say it sounds like another consensus is for everybody here is that we need to put more weight toward the formative so that that gives the students better prepared to go along with the summatives. So I guess the question will be is how do we handle the kids who do not to try to get them to do the formatives? Is it going to be enough to say there's more weight to them? Or do we take the step like has been suggested here in terms of starting to reduce some grades and to give some teachers some autonomy, and what would that look like? So I think that's more like where we need to get to. It seems like we're kind of coming to, like I said, the consensus for the 60-40 in terms of the more weight for the formatives. The reteach, retake has been effective in terms of reduction of kids. Hey, I better do better the first time because I don't really like having to go back and redo the steps. And even though I'm choosing, like Mr. Campbell shared there, so those are positive things. But how are we going to address? Do we think that it's okay to just to add the 40% weight to the formatives, or do we need to add more to it in terms of, hey, if you don't get this in on time, you're now going to, forfeit such and such? And I'll just sit back and listen to the committee and to our site base at this time.
From a data go ahead, Aaron.
You're fine. Sorry.
I was just going to say, from a data perspective, I feel like it would give us better information about what parts of things are actually working if we see because it seems like increasing the weight of summatives helped to a degree when we first went to the 70-30, and then increasing the hoops they have to jump through in order to do a reteach and retest seemed to help from the teacher's perspective on the committee. I would love to see how increasing the weight of the formatives to 40%, I would love to get data on that to see if that works before implementing more punitive measures, just so that we could see from an experimental perspective, is that what's causing a change or not?
I can only speak on behalf of the middle school just because that's all I know. But one thing, we had a middle school meeting the other day, a virtual meeting, and we were talking about how some kids get so far behind that they feel overwhelmed with how much late work they have. So if we could curtail the late work by giving it, instead of saying, hey, you have to the end of the quarter. For procrastinators like me, if I was in middle school and you told me I had till the end of the quarter to turn something in late, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. Whereas now, if I do it tomorrow and there's a little bit of a deduction on my grade, my parents will find out, or I won't get this reward for, like we have incentive field trips in the middle school. I won't receive this reward if I don't do it now. I think that was sort of where we were coming from. And we just discussed how that might look in the middle school. Like the most you could deduct for one day.
I want you to read that for you. I don't know if you already have that in front of you. You put down. I'm sorry I interrupt you, Beth.
You're fine. I have trouble breathing right now. We're good.
Oh yeah, it's a little heavy there in the stomach. The possible school.
Wow.
Well, I mean, the possible middle school late work policy.
Yeah.
You want me to share that, Beth?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so I've got this in front of me. This is what they present to me. Of course, this cannot happen without approval of the site base. But this is something we could take, or we could throw out and say we don't want to do this at all, or we could adopt this, or we could make some changes. But what they said here is for every late day, essentially was 10% off the assignment. So 1 day late, they've marked as the highest a student can get is a 90. 2 days late, highest you can get is an 80. 3 days late, highest you can get is a 70. 4 days late, highest you can get is a 60. And then the last one, 5 days late, the lowest score you can get is a 60%, unless the score you earn is lower than that. So That's just what the middle school shared. Something they had brought to my attention. I'll just let Beth and anybody else on the committee that wants to speak about that, please go ahead at this time.
And then I called Erin. She wasn't in our meeting, but I called Erin and we had a discussion about it. And we talked about how after that 5th day of it being late, they can still do it. But we didn't know if they should be able to get the score so if they got like a 54, that's the score they get, or do they get a 30 because that's a day and a half late. So there's some like bigger situations to think about. This doesn't have to be an SBDM policy. This is just what the middle school teachers thought. If we came together and had a uniform policy for the younger kids, they wouldn't have to try and navigate between each class as to what the rule is. So if we were able to do a SBDM late work policy and it be quite broad, like it's listed in the grading changes, then the middle school could adapt and make their own that wouldn't have to be SBDM policy, but could be just an understanding between the teachers of that's how we would run it for the middle school younger kids.
So Beth, just so I understand on this, so say it's 1 day late, so 90% is the best that a kid could get. And I'm going to use very easy numbers just so it's straightforward. So if a kid would have turned it in on time and would have received a 50%, would that kid then receive a 45?
No, well, that's what Erin and I discussed. So
Right.
I'll let her talk because she's the number lady.
Well, because I was interpreting it like that. Like, well, if you're 5 days late, the highest you can get is 60, and it would have been a 50. Now it's a 30, was kind of how I was interpreting it. And then Beth was on the other side where it was like, no, if you scored a 50, you still get a 50. And which I like better, because whenever you're talking about docking points, what I don't want to see happen is I don't want kids to have nothing to work for. I don't want them to say, oh, well, I'm 2 weeks late. It's going to be a 0. Why should I bother doing it? So I would want to see something instituted where there was definitely like a low cap, where it was like a teacher can't go lower. I can't say you're 10 days late, you get a 0.
I would agree with that, Mrs. Guest. The one thing, and I'll leave it there, buddy. But the one thing I would just want to express that my wants are, I don't ever want to see there a time be a kid has no incentive to work, that they've got a 0, that we are not, we're supposed to be continuous learning. So I do want to share my feelings on that. I think it's important that they always have incentive to work. They always have incentive to learn. I'm okay with there being some type of, hey, it's not in, you're going to lose this. But I think there always has to be the kid have incentive, motivation to, hey, you can get this, you can pass this, you can get these points. I don't believe in just being punitive. I think there has to be some type of accountability. I would just use that word, but I don't ever want to see, and I don't think anybody here does either, but this is not punishment. You got a 0, you're finished. If we have that, then I do worry about graduation rate, earning credits, lack of motivation being worse, behavior escalating because the kid figures out at Christmas, hey, I have no chance here. Those are things I think I feel very strongly about and want to avoid. So I'll leave it to you. I'll let you go ahead again, Mrs. Getz. I just want to.
I think what would look like, Mr. Wright, is if I turned in an 80% paper, and I was a day late, I would still be an 80% paper. Even though the highest would be a 90, I would still get the 80.
Yeah.
If I turned in a 95% paper and I was 2 days late, then I would get the 80. So I think you'd still want to give the score that was earned, and then we could look. I mean, it's just a suggestion. I don't know how this looks.
So really then the only kids you're punishing are the kids that would have scored a 90 or above. Is that what we're saying? Like not all kids are being punished equally, only the kids who would have typically scored a 90 or above?
But if they've had more days to complete an assignment than other kids, their score, had they all completed it on the same day, then their score is what it is. But if you give me 3 extra days to do an assignment, I'm probably going to score better on that assignment because I'm getting more time to do it. So even if they got like a 98 or a 95 and you take off the 10%, the lowest they're going to get is the 10% for that day. Like, so you're hiring kids, they're going to excel, but they're still going to see a small decrease. The hope would be is that they stop turning in late work. Would be the hope for the kid who is always turning in late work. They can still see some success in turning in that late work. So say they get a 55. Me personally, as a teacher, if a kid who got a 55, it was 10 days late, came to me and said, I really want to get a 60 on this, why wouldn't I let them make corrections to get that 60? But that's as high as they can get. I'm not going to give them a 0 for it being 10 days late, but they are still going to get the grade that they earned, whether it's a 55 or if they got an 80 on it, but they're 10 days late. Heck, if I had 10 more days to do an assignment, I'd get an 82. So it's sort of that idea of trying not to play catch up because we're seeing it affect their summative grade. Because they're so far behind in class that they're not scoring well on their test. Is that what we sort of talked about, Aaron? Like the idea?
Yeah, the idea is we want to see more presence in the formative and effort in the formatives so that we can see more success on the summatives. I'm also, and maybe I'm going off kilter here, what would a retake look like this? I mean, if it's due today, maybe I just turn in a bad paper today and then I have the retake. What would it look like from then? Because that would be what if I'm the student, that's going to be my plan right now.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, oh, I'll just turn in a bad paper on day one and then I can retake it.
And then I'll retake it and then I'll just meet that due date. Do you see what I'm saying?
You're only retaking summatives. Are we talking about formatives or summatives? I'm having a.
I was talking about kids personally who were failing. Like we're talking about the upper end kids and the ones that are worried about getting their A. I was just speaking on behalf of me as a teacher. If I had a kid who's failing my class because of formatives and late work, if they came to me on a one-on-one basis and said, hey, can I try this again? That's that teacher autonomy to like let them at least try and get the 60. I'm not saying a kid has a 98, let's retake it again so you get your 100. That's just grade chasing. Like, so I would hope teachers.
No, I'm saying I wasn't prepared. I didn't do it, didn't read the book, didn't want to write the paper.
And if it's not done, I won't take a completed or incomplete. I think that's some of the problem is we're taking half-done assignments because kids are trying to find that loophole. If it's not completed, then I wouldn't take it. I'd say finish this, turn it in tomorrow.
Yeah, but all right, even if it's a math multiple choice, I'm just gonna, all right, I'll circle these, I'll write some words down on the long end, turn it in and see, because.
Do we want to say like that they couldn't get higher than, or they couldn't get, I don't know. I have not thought of that because I wouldn't play the loophole. I'd be the kid who would try harder to turn it in on time. So that I didn't think of that.
I just thought of it now, or I would have asked you earlier.
Or maybe they don't get a score higher than the first one they turned in. Because if it's late work, it'd be going down. So if you turn in your first assignment and it's an 85 and you're like, I didn't like that, I wasn't prepared, and then you get a 95, you can't get higher than that 85 you already had.
I know, but I don't like that either because if I didn't quite understand it last week, but I fully understand it now, I still want my grade to reflect my new understanding.
Or then we just
no matter what we do, we're going to have kids find loopholes. No matter what specifics we put in place, kids are going to find loopholes. I just want to make sure that I worry about muddying up the measurement of content mastery with grading behavior. Because grading, everything that we know research-wise about grading behavior takes away from the grading of content mastery. And I worry about that.
But our kids who are currently failing and not mastering, it's mostly because they get so far behind by not doing their work. So that worries me as well, too.
I agree, but how do we address those specific kids? In the same way that we as teachers don't necessarily like emails sent to everybody about something that was a problem with 2 teachers. If we're having a problem with specific students, how can we put something in place? How can we build something culturally in our school that addresses those specific kids who are having motivation problems? How can we work on their motivation and lifting them up and giving them every opportunity without it affecting everybody in the school who may or may not need those extra support?
But according to the last survey we did, 75% think they have a motivation issue. Like, I feel like right now we're at a point where most of our kids are having the motivational issues. Like, the minority are the kids that don't, and we're trying to make it as a whole.
I was in the group that did that survey and that analyzed that data, Ms. Coors, and it was the percentage of teachers that feel like the kids that are struggling, not every kid. It wasn't, we believe 75% of kids are having a motivation issue. It was 75% of teachers believe that the kids who are struggling due to motivation, not necessarily because they don't have the skill to understand and learn the content. And I think that there's a big distinction there. And I guess my question is, how do we address that motivation in a way that's not necessarily punitive and that's not necessarily going to grade behavior? How do we lift up those kids? How do we put things in place culturally within our school? We've done, some incentives and things. I don't think there's nearly as many incentives in 9 through 12 as there are in 7 and 8, just by the nature of that. You guys have a lot of incentive things built in that I think could be helpful that we don't necessarily have at the high school level. But I wish we could spend some time trying to look at what are some models for building in supports to kids who are struggling with motivation and addressing that specific population of kids in a way that's supportive as opposed to punitive, to look for, ways that we can help them improve.
Okay. Go ahead. Was it Beth? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think also if we do have kids have motivation trouble, and I'm going to sound very philosophical, but what are we teaching our hiring kids if we just let them turn in late work all the time, and in their college classes, they're not able to? So that goes back to, they were literally sitting in high school classes, not doing their work for that class, but doing gateway work because they have deadlines and they don't accept late work. So like, our kids know how to play that system. I'm saying I want our classes to be just as important because our teachers are working hard. Our other kids are working hard. Our classes should be just as important as those gateway classes. The only difference between the two was the gateway classes had deadlines and they would not accept late work, and our classes accept late work for the entire quarter. So, and if you ask kids, that's what they'll tell you. They'll say, well, we had as many days as we want to make it up. What are we teaching our kids at that point, I guess, is my problem with it. But in the middle school, it's very different because you're teaching a kid how to be responsible. By the time they become high schoolers, I think it's another ballgame. I'm not in the high school, so I try not to speak too much about it. But I think if we continue to let kids just turn in late work whenever, it is skewing our data for our summatives. And this last year, we had more kids ineligible for the incentive field trips, and it got to the point where it didn't matter to them. So I don't know, like we do have incentives, but even good kids or model students were getting behind in formative assessments because they had as much time as they wanted to make them up.
And I see that too. And I think when we were that culture, we need to set the culture of high standards. We need to set a culture that celebrates success of meeting those standards. And that was that road that we were on. And it was like, all right, we're going to celebrate the college. And it has to be cool to be the smart kid. It can't be, hey, guess what I just figured out I can do, and I can find this loophole, and that becomes cool, because that's what just brings that down. We need to promote and celebrate the successes. We need to celebrate the accomplishments.
I would go with we need to do, and that's one of the areas of focus this summer, is how are we going to celebrate our successes academically, achievement wise, do a better job of that next year. So it's one of the things on the to-do list this summer. So I will say this, at this time, it's almost 5:30. We spent a great deal of time, and we could go on forever, but I do think we need to, what are the next steps for next meeting? Because we do have some other things we need to cover tonight. So let's wrap this up real quickly, come to a consensus on what are our next steps, what are we gonna do for the next meeting, because obviously we're gonna have some discussion again next month, it looks like. So let's get that nailed down so we can move on to the rest of our agenda for this evening.
And also, we'll need a motion to extend.
Oh, it is
I'll
5:30.
make a motion to extend.
I'll second it.
So anybody want to, Mr. Wright, your thoughts there on what we need for next month as the leader of this committee? Or as
Yeah.
the,
So I think we're at consensus at looking at what the first few portions of the recommendations would look like in policy, continuing the discussion as far as what it would look like in policy, and not bringing anything to a vote, not having anything approved, bringing it back to site-based next time, working on the language, omitting some things completely. There was not really a decision, however, on where we want to go with the managing student work piece. If we want to look at it the same, look at it within actual policy, like the midterms and finals, the formative and summative assessment, the gradebook setup, etc. Where is site-based at with that? Because ultimately, it's site-based. It's the council's decision on how they want to proceed with this.
I would like to see some more thought on like what is the retake policy going to look like under the managing student work part. I feel like we need to think more about that.
so next month,
There's
let's
one other
focus on
thing.
the managing student work. That needs to be our area of focus.
If the proposal is that points are going to be deducted for late work, I'm still confused on how that would look with our retake policy.
I'll throw this out there too. One thing that we need to consider is one of two scenarios are going to have to happen for this to take effect for next school year. Either we're going to have a first reading in June and a second reading in July, or we would have to have a first reading in July and we would have to have an emergency site-based meeting to do a second reading. So just laying it out there as far as the timeline, because once we get into August, that's too late to really have, if we have to make potential changes in how we set up IC or how we communicate that with parents and everything else. So this is something that one way or the other, whether everything is adopted or nothing is adopted, the decision's kind of going to have to be made by July.
Go ahead, Mr. Cam. I know you're waiting.
I was just going to say that if somebody would care to take a note of this when we're talking about managing student work, and we've been mainly talking about formatives. But is this late penalty going to also apply to summative assignments that are not exams? It's like if I assign a paper someone for a summative grade and they turn it in late, are we also going to penalize for that? It's something else you should probably think about for next time.
So can we just go ahead and schedule an extra site-based meeting so we can talk about just this topic? Because I think it is going to require us an extensive amount of time to talk it out. And quite honestly, we've spent a lot of time interviewing people and everything else. So to have the next two meetings, site-based meetings, go as long as the last one did.
So you want to have just a meeting dedicated to this discussion with the site, just the site base, or with the site base and the committee? As you want to have just a meeting with the site base before we meet with in June again? Is that what you're saying here, Ms. Gonzalez?
I don't care either way. I don't care who is involved, if it's the committee and the site base. I just would like it dedicated to this topic so we can focus on and spend our time deciding on what we want.
Yeah, you can have extra meetings, but you have to stay strictly to the agenda, which is what you're saying you want anyway. Yeah. And it has to be open to the public. Yeah. Just like any of the other meetings are. Anytime that we have a quorum, unless theoretically when we're doing hiring, we're in a form of executive session, so that is exempt. But otherwise, it would still have to be advertised and open to the public.
Yeah. Well,
I don't
just
hate
when we
that
talk
idea.
about 2 more meetings to get it in for next year, I worry about us rushing and making decisions that aren't good decisions because we're
Yep.
trying to hurry up and get something passed for the next school year. I'd like for us to be able to spend our time, truly think it out and make a decision and do that so that it's in time for next year.
I think it's a good idea.
Here's my thought process, and you guys can tell me if you disagree. I'm open. We can keep our regularly scheduled June meeting, schedule one in between between that and our July, our regular July one, or do you think that we need to schedule a special one between now and our June meeting? I'll leave that up to you guys.
I think the problem is with your June meeting, you're going to have other things on the agenda. So I would think that you would want to do the one without anything else on the agenda before the next meeting, because potentially that's when you're going to get into your first reading would be the June meeting.
Well, let's go ahead and let's look at, I'll end up looking at a date and get something out there and communicate that to everybody. And we'll look to schedule something first week of June or so. Would that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll be in communication. I'll send that out to everybody as soon as they can nail down a date. All righty.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we'll just keep it 4 o'clock, maybe a Wednesday, maybe the first Wednesday in June. I think that's the 3rd, something like that. If you guys can kind of look at your calendars now. I'm thinking June 3rd, 4 o'clock.
That's fine.
That'll work for me.
Give me one moment. I signed up for a PD today on June 3rd. Hold on. Oh, it ends at 3. I'm good.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and we'll mark that down on our calendars, and I'll invite all of our committee, certainly our SBDM and all of our people who work so hard to put this proposal together. I'm going to include all of them as well. Okay. All right, this time let's go ahead and move on then to our budget report. And I want to thank everybody from
I just want to say thank you because I'm going to sneak out. Sorry. Thanks, guys, for listening. I appreciate it. And if you have questions, you can email me. Sorry, I didn't fix my hair. That's why you can't see me. So, but if you have any other questions or concerns, it'd be great for us to be able to talk about it before our next meeting as a committee as well. So like the stuff Mr. Campbell brought up, the stuff Ms. Getz brought up, anything else that comes up, that way we can try and discuss it and come up with a solution or even meet somewhere in the middle. So thank you guys for listening though.
Thank you.
Yep. Guys, have a good week. Stay dry.
Hopefully my base is not leaking. I'm worried here. I keep looking out the rain like, oh Lord. Budget report. Let's go ahead now and let's finalize the 2020, 2021 budget. You can look there at the requisitions purchase order to give everybody some time to take a look at that.
Did we ever figure out what general supplies was going to cover?
I did not, but I was going to add here on the $1,000 the senior trip fund. I checked into that. What that was is if you don't use that money, you end up losing it. So what happened is that money was moved to an activity fund for the senior trip. So right now we currently have $3,720.14 in the senior trip account. I know Ms. Gonzalez asked me at our last meeting if we could use that for, let's say, some type of scholarship or whatever for our current seniors. I don't think we're able to do that, or I was told we're not able to do that. But what we can do is we can use that money for senior trips. So we've not been successful, and not for lack of trying. I know Mr. Mears has worked very hard to try to organize trips to DC, New York, Chicago. We've had those in the past, but for whatever reason, past 2 or 3 years, that's not gotten off the ground. So maybe we need to start looking at some different things, such as maybe some day trips. Those could include parks, Kings Island, Reds games, whatever we could discuss where we could use those funds for those kids. But I did want to, and we don't have to make that decision tonight. I just wanted to share that $1,000. One of the questions last month we had, that's where the money is. It went to an activity fund for senior trips, and we've got quite a large sum of money in there. So really, for next year's seniors, we need to start doing that where we could pay. We go to a Reds game or whatever, and we'd offset all the costs, or go to Kings Island and get some type pack, whatever it is we decide to do. I'm just generalizing here, so I wanted to at least share that.
And I think part of the issue on the senior trips is that they're really pretty expensive. Even taking a bus to wherever they're going, they're still really expensive. And the way that the company that we've been working with structures its payment plan, like they have to have a non-refundable deposit in like extremely early, and kids just don't know if the money's going to be there for them to commit. So that uncertainty, as well as the cost, I think, is what has been prohibitive for our students.
I would agree, Mr. Campbell.
Other question. Last month we talked about like maybe creating a line item for textbooks that we could kind of put some money in. Mr. Campbell, you had brought up textbooks for social studies. Did you ever come up with a number on what something like that would cost, or was it?
I did not.
You? I can't remember.
If I had to estimate off the top of my head, I'm going to guess that normally a social studies textbook is going to be about $90 a piece. I'm sure there's some sort of class set discount, but I couldn't see it being more than like 10 or 15%. So, if I got a class set of 30, we're looking at, math number of dollars.
Okay, and then we were discussing where that money could maybe come from, and that's where we were wondering what the general supplies cost.
2,500-ish. I think you're muted, Miss Bushley. I saw your lips moving.
Oh, sorry. I just grabbed a calculator on my screen. It looks like about $2,700 if they're 90 a piece.
Yeah. Was I supposed to follow up on something? I'm sorry. It got really quiet.
No, I'm just curious. Along with Aaron, can we use general supplies funding for that, or is there someplace else that can come from? We can carve that out of so that we can start like we talked about last time, a rotating schedule for textbook adoption.
Well, so maybe it's my lack of comprehension of this, but if you're looking at the page that has our budget on it, on one page, it has our working budget for 2019-2020. The next page is our allowable budget codes for 2021. Those two things do not look at all the same. And I'm curious, like, how does the budget code for next year translate to what our working budget would look like for next year?
Well, this is like the POs and what we've requested. And then at the bottom, it's how much money was allotted to each department. And then there's the things like the copy and the graduation. The proposed budget for next year, the allowable budget codes, that's just kind of how much is being.
No, I'm not talking about the requisitions.
Okay, where are you looking at?
The title of the page is SBDM Working Budget 2019-2020.
It's page 6 of the PDF, Aaron.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that was just like how much was in each department and how much each department spent, and if they had any remaining.
But then the budget code, which is on the very next page.
That's what we're approving for next year. So we're saying, okay, well, we could put 2,500 in for library books. We'll put 6918 for copier rental, 800 for postage, like what we're budgeting for next year. So the question last month was then, well, where's this $18,000 in general supplies? What all does that include? Would we be able to pull some of it out of that code and put it into the textbook code to roll into each department every year to kind of keep everybody current?
Well, true, yeah. And what I'm thinking is that possibly the general supplies code is what makes up the budgets for, if you look at the working budget document for art department, English language arts, math department, science department, social studies department.
And it could
those,
be.
Yeah, those codes are not on the proposal for next year.
And it could be. I have no clue, to be honest with you, because it doesn't have like that 0610 anywhere on that sheet. Or any of them.
I've put a note down here to look into that, and I can definitely communicate that out to the committee. I'll find out tomorrow. Okay.
When does this have to be approved by? Do we have to approve it this month?
I think we have some time. I certainly think that if we don't do it until June, that'll be fine. Just has to be before your next, the working budget starts obviously in July. So I think if we approve it at our June, we'll be okay.
Okay.
So let me write this down about this.
The only reason I bring all this up, Aaron, is that if we were to move money from the general supplies into textbooks, we could potentially be taking money away from some departments.
Exactly. That's why I want to know what that general supplies consist of.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul.
I'm pointing at my screen like you all can see what I'm talking about.
I will. I'll get that figured out, and I will shoot an email out to all of our site base tomorrow. That work for everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's important when I'm highlighting here, use my yellow highlighter. So I've got it. Anybody want to approve I guess we can. Anybody, any question on the requisition purchase orders at all? The SBDM working budget for 2019-20 is in there. The first 3 pages.
So we got on our budget this year, we got $8 grand left. So right now.
Where you get
interpreting that?
Mr. Campbell?
So remaining. Well, I guess it could
I think it's
potentially be
55.
18,000.
That's what's spent. Are you on surplus?
No, I'm looking at the.
SBDM working budget 2019-20.
That's the document. I'm looking at the bold numbers at the bottom in the remaining column.
$8,170.22.
That's just
Right.
section
That's
7.
the section 7.
Oh, okay. So 10,000.
10,000.
Do we have upcoming expenses that we know about?
I was gonna do it before.
Papers at the end of the year, I know, usually.
And is that that's the 3,200?
Not muted, so.
Yeah.
So
More space to how much we spent on paper.
Am I off in saying that we have $15,000 left over at the end of the year?
Yes, you are. Because I think, well, Linda, kind of update this, and then by next month or August, we look at the surplus.
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, you could imagine maybe like 5,500 right now, but I would not count 15 or 10 even.
Is any of this needed, or will it be, or can it be used on new MacBooks or whatever? Or isn't it? Because didn't we used to have money at the end for the Play-Doh and some of our other contracts that came up not every year?
Doesn't Play-Doh come up this year since our SIG grant ended?
I'm thinking it did.
That's already been being paid for out of other accounts from the SIG and what have you. So, and we're prepaying that as far down the line as possible. So, trying to use those funds because the SIG expires in September.
Yeah, and there were current SIG funds that were still available. So, Mr. Wolf put in a lot of work being preemptive and paid for a lot of those programs.
Good.
Do we have a list, or I guess it'd be in old minutes, of what we used like what programs we bought with surplus money last year?
I do not have that list.
Might be in the minutes. I was just want to make sure we're not missing anything that.
That'd be something I'm sure Miss Gosney could provide. You know, she'd be the person that if contacted, she would respond to you very quickly and get that information. So if you want to follow up with her.
Okay.
I didn't think we had any last year. It was the year before. Because we did the laminator machine last year.
Was that it?
Ooh, and while we're talking about budget, I'm supposed to let you guys know that the cold laminator that we got free with the 3D printer, once the regular hot laminator broke for a while and teachers started to hear about the cold laminator, they really took advantage of that. So now they have 0 cold lamination. So if we're looking for things to do in surplus at the end of the year, it's like, I think $300 for 2 big rolls. The library said if teachers want to continue to use the cold laminator, they would need help supporting that because they are out.
I think Ms. Gonzalez brought this up too, since we're getting closer to like the July, August, where we're going to have to decide what to do with surplus money, was sending out a survey or something to staff and teachers and departments to see what things would be requested so that we have a better idea of how to spend that money for staff. Which is probably just a Google form. I could put that together.
Okay.
We could probably also go back through our minutes and look for department needs as they presented.
Yeah. What you doing down?
They're coming to get you, Aaron?
I thought that was at your house.
It's in Dayton.
I was trying to figure out whose house that was.
I thought it was Campbell's too. I was like, this Brad's reaction right away. I was like, it looks like Mr. Campbell. Something's going on there.
It's my house. Like
Okay.
2 doors down.
Uh-oh. Hope everybody's all right. So are you gonna send something out, Mrs. Getz, that what you're gonna do?
Yeah, I guess, cause I don't know, did every department take advantage of that needs part? That's the only thing I worry about. I feel like some departments had lists of things they would like, but some not so much. So maybe just a survey out to see.
We can do both. Compare the two.
Yeah, we started the needs portion of the reports in January because I know special ed reported in January, and I think we were the first ones to institute the needs. So we should have gotten through most of the departments up through March.
We covered everybody because obviously we skipped the March meeting, so we added them to last month. So every department has been covered to this point. So I think we can look back at our meeting minutes and pull what the needs are. It's there. That was the point of we did make that implement that change at the start of the new year, beginning in January, where each department came and shared good news as well as their needs for their department. So it'll be in the minutes.
Okay, so we don't need a survey, just basically go through the minutes.
Anybody want to approve the 2020, 2021 budget?
Sure.
Not till we find out about the general.
Well, we're just applying,
supply.
we're not approving the 2021. You're talking about 2019-20, right?
Yes, my fault.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
We don't have to approve it.
right.
We don't have to approve it, do we?
No.
We
No.
Just move on.
All right. So what about looking at, we looked at staffing allocations. Do we need to take some time to look at that? And then we had the Section 7 report. I don't know if you guys want to take a few minutes to look
Has
at
there
that.
been a change? Has there been a change to staffing allocations based on budget cuts for next year?
No. The only thing we did was the SIG grant. With that expiring, we ended up not. Mrs. Dacey's position is now Mr. Mears is going to fill that position this year. So that's the only change. If we hadn't done that, then we would have had to cut somewhere. And we did not want to do that. Or if we would have wanted to add a Spanish teacher, it would have gotten complicated. So that was another consideration.
So are we not looking forward to bringing back a Spanish teacher?
Not at this time.
I know not next year, but like, is this kind of off our radar now?
And Mr. Myers can correct me if he disagrees here, but one of the things when we really started to dig in with student transcripts, as far as the Spanish credits go, they were so all over the place that putting together any sort of a logical Spanish schedule was out of the question for this year. So part of the motivation was the fact that we would have to make a cut somewhere to be able to bring that back. But for me, the bigger motivation was it was just going to be such a logistical mess, and it was going to be a struggle for the teacher coming in. So the impression that I walked away with is there's a strong appetite to kind of get everything more streamlined once again, get kids kind of in the same spot to where hopefully at some point we would be able to reinvest in a Spanish teacher and be able to bring that back.
And I will mention I do agree with Mr. Wright there, but I also think I need to throw out there, let's be very honest and transparent. We can all follow the news, and with there's going to be a projected shortfall budget-wise for the state next year. So the idea that we're going to add staff at some level is not going to, I don't think that's realistic. I'm worried about the opposite. My concern is the opposite. So
I think at any point moving forward, even if the budget somehow ends up being better than what we can all kind of guess it's going to be in the future from all of this, a position would have to be cut to make room for a Spanish teacher to return.
Has everybody had time to look at the allocation in the Section 7 reports?
Yep.
Is it okay that we move forward?
Yeah.
All right. Next on the agenda is the bylaw or policy review. Last month, on the old business, we had our second reading of bylaws pages. Pages 9 and 10. So I'll let everybody have an opportunity to look at pages 9 and 10 and see if there's any changes that need to be made. This is our second reading for those policies, or for those bylaws, I should say.
It doesn't look like the language under Section C was altered.
Yeah. What should that have read there, Mr. Campbell? I can go back in my old one, but
It's in the minutes. Let me see what it said.
I can look back
Oh,
at the last one. Okay.
Was it literally
Okay.
changing will to may?
There was a little bit more, I feel like, than that, but it was very simple change.
I think it was the vice chairperson may act as a chairperson. Is that what it was in the absence of the chairperson?
I think the issue with
yeah,
it right
something like that.
I think that the issue as it stands is it doesn't seem like a vice chair has been chosen for a while. I think that was the biggest issue coming out of that discussion. I'm trying to just remember.
I need to look back in the old one and last month.
The minutes attached in this packet say old business, second reading of bylaws, page 8, election of officers. I don't know if this goes along with that. It says replace second bullet to may elect or appoint to serve 1
Oh,
year.
that could be what I was thinking about. That could be it. So possibly we moved on from that.
But I was wondering if that applies to what you were talking about with the vice chair, because I thought I remembered it being, I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought maybe that was what we were talking about with that change.
I did too.
Because otherwise, if no changes are made to the vice chairperson portion, I would highly suggest actually picking one starting in July with the next council, which is, I believe, the current council was all reelected. Not a huge thing, just if you have policy just followed.
Yeah, I remember us talking about it last time.
So do we want to change the policy or pick a vice chairperson?
Why wouldn't we want a vice chairperson?
No specific reason.
Can't think of a reason why we wouldn't.
I think it's a good idea to have one. Just heaven forbid something would happen to your principal, who's your acting chairperson, and say they have to be out of school for like 3 months. That would allow a vice chairperson to step up and actually lead your site-based meetings. Otherwise, you would not be able to conduct site-based meetings because you wouldn't have an acting chair. I think the more realistic scenario would be the chair can't make a June meeting, so you decide either cancel a June meeting or the vice chair would hold it. But it's, I'm sure it's not out of the realm of possibility that something would happen to your principal. Hopefully nothing happens to Scott or whoever else is the principal. But just if it did, that allows you to continue with your site-based.
Yeah.
I have enjoyed watching on Netflix. I got into the show Designated Survivor. So I don't know if anybody's watched that at all there, Mr. Wright, but I'll be
You told
on
me to. I need to.
when I walk out to my car here tonight. So
I feel like once in the 7 years that I've been on this that we had that scenario, didn't we, Ms. Bushley? Because weren't you the one that stepped up?
Yes, ma'am. We elected a vice chair one time in the terms that I've been on, and I think there was one meeting that the principal couldn't make it to that I led.
Yeah.
So are you proposing that we elect Ms. Bushley as vice chair?
Not it. I think we at least should appoint somebody so that we're not like we were last time, kind of like, all right, who is it? Who is the vice chair when we need it?
Yeah. The other place where potentially, and it depends how you decide to hold your hiring process, but if Scott moves on for whatever reason, he's the new superintendent of Dayton schools, then generally a vice chair will kind of spearhead your committee, but it doesn't have to be, obviously. I don't know how that process is here. The super is generally involved at schools, but a vice chair can kind of run that. And so that's another scenario where they come up.
Yeah, we've been through that twice, and our super has stepped up both times.
Yeah, and that's by far the norm.
So are we going to nominate Mrs. Bushley? Is that what it is?
Does Ms. Bushley want to accept?
She's okay.
If everybody's okay with it, I'll be happy to do it. I just want to make sure everybody's all right with it.
Absolutely.
You got this. You're the most seasoned.
Thank you. I have the gray hair to prove it.
I have more gray hair than you do.
So does everything else look okay on page 9 before we move to 10 for our second reading?
Looks good to me.
The feedback gave me the heebie-jeebies. Oh man.
Somebody told me in a regional meeting I was in for Zoom that it was if somebody has a cell phone too close to their computer when you're meeting. They said having cell phones close by can cause feedback sometimes. That's what they told us in the regional special ed thing.
Makes sense.
Can we put that in the minutes that the feedback gives Mr. Wright's heebie-jeebies?
That's the official term for it, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, medical term.
Like my skin started crawling, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Okay.
Any changes to pages 9 and 10 for the second reading? Or page 10, I should say.
Are we still good with the 5 standing committees that we had in place? It says culture and climate, literacy, PBIS. I guess there were just 3. I thought at some point it said there were 5. Yeah,
there were 5 with them.
Culture and climate, literacy, PBIS, professional learning, community, and intervention committee. Are we still good with that?
Did we have all of those committees last year?
We do. PBIS is something that I know Mr. Wright is going to be did a lot of looking into that this past year, making some changes for next year, and something that is on our agenda for things to bring back and make some changes, adaptations. So culture and climate is something that a previous counselor and Mrs. Course really were instrumental in that. So I think we need to, that's something I'd like to continue to do and really need to get out and get some people who are interested and motivated to do that, because it is an important part of school.
The English teacher in me would probably put an Oxford comma after professional learning community committee. It's part of why it was so confusing as to whether there were 4 or 5. I'm just putting that out there. That's my.
I think that's
coming out.
I think that's the only committee that I'm not aware that we had last year was a PLC committee. I don't know that there was a committee tasked with looking at what PLCs were doing and what PLC charges were. I don't think. I think that was just administration directed, wasn't it?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it says in here though that they can't be dissolved unless we dissolve them through here, and that on the first day of school we invite staff, faculty, and parents and students to these committees. And I don't recall that we've ever done that either. We did when we first established them.
I think that what happens sometimes, I just think with all the things going on with schools and everything going on, that sometimes things, unfortunately, get overlooked. And I think that then when you look back at these things, that's why we look back at these and you're like, okay, this is something that we need to review and bring back and or eliminate or change or whatever we decide to do. And that's one thing that becomes obvious to me when we look at some of the bylaws and sometimes the policies, that, okay, it's a reminder of there's just a lot of things happening in the school.
Well, and to play devil's advocate too, what does the word invited mean? Is it just that it's open for them to join, or that it needs to actually be advertised? That's just ambiguous to me.
Do we want a policy that's ambiguous though, I guess is my question. Like, I think we should either make it clear what our intentions are, or if we're not going to invite
Yeah, I would
parents
agree one
and
with the other.
students, to not put it in the policy. And I might also suggest that we start a timeline for each month that kind of lets us know what we need to do for that month as we go into the next year, like we do with setting our teacher funds. You know, the date, the timeline of the money has to be spent by this date for us to know for end of year. You know what I'm talking about? To include that in that as part of we need to do for next year.
It does say in the number 3 there, it does say that classified employees, parents, and students may join the culture, climate, literacy, PBIS, or ad hoc committees anytime during the school year, as long as the committee's charges do not include confidential student information. So it sounds like, you know, there's going to be a few people that are assigned to a committee by the principal, and then anybody else who might be interested can come and go as they please. Is that how you all interpret it?
Yeah, I remember when these were first created. Do you remember, Angie? Because I believe that I was a part of that culture and climate, because part of our report card showed we had to have parent involvement in some of our committees. You remember?
Yeah, the state recommended parent involvement in general, and one of the ways that we had attempted to try to address that was to open up some of the committees, some of the standing committees, to parents and I believe students as well. Yeah, it does say students.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, as it's written right now, those are open currently to, you know, whoever would like to join basically within the school community. Are you saying you'd like us to send out some sort of formal letter or something saying if you're interested in being on, just like somebody sends out a letter for like parent elections, maybe we could just send out a letter at the beginning of the year that says if you're interested in joining any of these committees, please, you know, contact whomever so that we can get you scheduled.
If it doesn't matter to us anymore, I'm not passionate about that. But at the time that we created these, it mattered to us about our ratings.
I'm curious what part of the way that what makes you think that it's not important to us?
Do we need to file a motion to extend?
Oh, yeah,
Like,
like 14
I think
minutes.
it's 6:30.
Oh.
Oh.
Is there a certain way that we're handling things that makes it feel like it's not important? And if so, like, how can we address that? How can we fix that?
No. So I know it was a big deal when we first did it, and then I heard nothing about it last year. I don't know that any parent was on it, so we couldn't have said, "Hey, we have this parent on it." So my thing is just if we care, meaning if it matters to our report card, that we have this on there just to prove, yes, we have parents involved because we have this parents on this committee, then I think it would be beneficial for us to send something out to invite a parent or student to do that, so that we do have it for our report card, is what I'm saying. But I'm saying if we don't care about that anymore, if it's not a measurable thing on the report card, then I don't think
Whether
it's
it's
necessary.
measurable, yeah, whether it's measurable on the school report card or not, to me, it's kind of irrelevant. I think it's important that we involve as many members of the community as we can. But I think short of sending out a letter and saying, hey, here's an opportunity to get involved in your child's school, and maybe sending out an email to all the students, hey, here's a great way for you to get involved in some of the things going on in your school, take a leadership role, stretch yourself, challenge yourself. I think that would be awesome. But I don't know how we can ensure that somebody's on there, because like you guys have seen, we have enough trouble just getting.
Oh yeah, no. We were the only two
appointments.
nominated or voted for.
Yeah,
That's why I said I'm not passionate about it, because I'm not asking for another responsibility for either myself or Jen. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I think it's important that we offer it to people. I don't think we can guarantee that we're going to have any takers, but I think it's important that we still offer it as an opportunity if members of the community want to get involved. I think it should stay in there, and I think maybe something at the beginning of the year in our welcome paperwork where we do all the enrollment packets and everything. That would be a great placement of that communication, to just when they're going through everything anyway, let them know, hey, here's an opportunity to get involved if you'd like.
I know the committees have done some really good work since I've been at Dayton. I mean, particularly the PBIS committee has spent a lot of time investing individually in some of our students. And, I was part of the Culture and Climate Committee very, very briefly for a little bit. And, we had fun trying to create a nice culture in our schools. So, I think they're important.
So we're going to leave it worded like it is. And then we just need to make a note to invite people in August, right?
Yeah. And I think you guys, Mr. Myers and Mr. Wright, should probably make a point of, maybe you have done this, I don't know, just make a point of actually, assigning specific people to it and letting us know as a council.
Weren't we assigned in the teacher handbook at the beginning of the year? I'm pretty sure I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Assigned to a committee.
Yeah, but they're in the teacher handbook.
I'm just saying none of those committees that I can remember have reported to us at all this year, have they?
No,
No.
not reported to you.
And the parents don't get a copy of the teacher handbook either, so we wouldn't know. The parent representatives here would not know.
We can definitely do that. Grow that way.
Are we okay with the second reading of page 10?
Yes.
I am.
Do we want to go ahead and read 11, 12, and 13 this time?
Excuse me.
All of these committee charges say that they will present to the SBDM during meetings biannually. So if each of these is going to be reporting, if we want all these standing committees to continue to exist, and they're supposed to be reporting twice a year, I'm wondering if we should put together a schedule similar to reporting departments, so that we have everybody. It could be the same as the department reporting, because those are all twice a year as well.
Agreed.
If we schedule it, we won't forget it.
So that can go
Go ahead
on.
and make a schedule there, Ms. Bushley.
Hey, I have a note of
Do you want to have them report
student in front of a monitor.
kind of like we do in our departments? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. And if that would be helpful, I can make one of those up that rotates along with the departments. Hopefully department reporting has been shorter because we're doing it in a slightly different format and not going over every single line of, failure reports or anything. It's just hitting, needs and highlights. So that should allow some extra time for those committees to report. And I think maybe we handle it the same way. Instead of there being huge biannual reports, maybe we just hit those same three things. The committee sees these as pluses, the committee sees these as needs. And this is our plan going forward to keep it brief and structured similarly.
I think that would be a nice step for us and some growth for our school. So, yeah.
We are going to need to change the wording for the intervention committee because it actually states December and April meetings. So we might just want to take that number 2 and switch it to the same wording as the other 4. It says this committee will submit a report to SBDM biannually. That way, however that schedule looks, we're still compliant.
So on number 2, Mrs. Getz.
Under intervention committee charge.
We could also have them or ask them to review their own charges just to see if they're still relevant.
It's a good idea.
So are we expecting them to actually show up at a meeting or just give us a report?
Make it
I
easy.
think it'd be helpful for them to be there, to answer questions if we have any.
Yeah.
Is that what you were going to say, Mr. Myers?
I was going to say they could do that, or if they simply want to share like a document, and if we felt like you needed to call them back, we could do that as well. Either way, I'm fine.
I was just trying to be cognizant of teacher time. So like if, you worked for one department and had to report 1 month because of your department, but then we're on this committee and had to report another one, that was an extra meeting that they would have to show up at or maybe we try to coordinate that so that they show up at the same time.
Or if someone does, want to show up to report, maybe instead of the entire committee reporting in person, we could just have, the committee elects a chairperson who attends those 2 meetings a year to answer questions if we need a human there.
Yeah, and now the way we're doing it now, the majority of teachers don't have to show up for their department reporting. It's just a department chair. So
Hopefully staff likes that better too. I really haven't heard much feedback, but just trying to protect the staff's time as much as possible.
So can we say, instead of us reviewing these 3 pages or the 2.5 pages, can we say, instead of that, we're going to have the actual committees review their own charges?
I think that would be best if you're going to run the committee. Now, we do have to keep in mind that sometimes those committees can flip annually. Depending upon it can be turnover. So just something to keep in mind.
I thought we'd be done by now. That was an alarm for something else.
Sorry. I think the rest of 13 looks great.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really all we have left is just those looking through those charges for the most part.
So we'll look at 11, 12, and 13 second reading next month and update the bylaws 9 and 10. And at that point, by end of June meeting, we should have everything, all of our bylaws have been revisited. And then in July, we can start picking out policies that we need to review. And then I will definitely look at sending out a invitation for June the 3rd at 4:00, where we'll have a meeting just dedicated specifically to talk about grading policy. And I'll just, if you guys want me to share the policy again, or you can just pull it from here, we're going to just talk about that point by point. So I don't know if they're really, I'm not sure on the agenda type thing of what I need to share. It would just be more like us getting together, I would assume.
Yeah, the agenda would just strictly be grade policy discussion.
And I'll just tell everybody to pull that up, and if they need it, great. But I'll share that. I'll send the invitation here tonight or tomorrow. Okay.
And did you have next year's class schedule?
We are pretty well finished with that, and we'll be sharing that here shortly.
So part of the reason that hasn't been communicated with is until Friday, until grades were posted. Now we have to go back and actually look at what kids failed. Will the schedule still work how we want? So we've had a good idea. That's also there are definitely going to be some changes for some teachers. And we want to get that info to teachers as quickly as possible. But the last thing that we would have wanted would be, hey, you're going to go through these major changes, and then something weird happens at the end of the year, and no, actually, none of it's going to change. So, or, whatever. So that's part of the reason we don't want to be withholding, but that's why it hasn't been communicated more than what it has so far.
Okay.
But we're in a really good spot because in a normal school year, this is probably mid to late summer that the schedule is coming out. But because of other circumstances, there was time to work on it.
Yeah, so we're way ahead there, and we have, it really was helpful for the staff to submit this failure list too, and that makes it a little easier for us to sit there and start looking at that and start to see, if a student didn't earn a credit such and such. Well, now we have to go back and
They're in the video.
double check and then alter the schedule accordingly. So feel good about where we are, and we'll try and get that out as soon as possible, because I understand that the staff wants to know that, and as well as students. So any questions on that at all? Anything else?
Do we have any idea when school's actually going to go back in August?
At this
That's
time,
$1 million question.
Well, and the reason I'm
Which
asking,
of the 3 schedules would you like, Jennifer?
well, I don't care, honestly. Just because, like, I was talking to Mary Frohmeyer, who I was talking to, and with her being a nurse at St. Elizabeth, that was a concern that she had, is if we do go back in August, she's like, by the time, Halloween rolls around, the virus is going to be even worse. They're anticipating this fall and flu season. So I didn't know if we were looking at starting back earlier in August versus mid-August, or if that even come to the table. Or
whatever format school comes back in terms of whether it's
right, online or in person
before, or whether it's some type of alter schedule. There's 4 different proposals been thrown out there. I think it'll start at whatever it is. We'll start at our calendar year where it begins next year. And it's always about I see August 7th, first PD day is a Friday. So the 8th, 9th, 10th. So right around the 12th, I believe, is when we're projected to start next year. So whatever school looks like next year, I would, unless they hear something differently between now and then, I would expect school to start then.
Okay.
Whatever it looks like at that point.
Okay. And then next month is our last scheduled site-based meeting. So we have to put the rest of the next 6 months on the calendar. And then this is kind of off topic, but sports, since everything's social distancing right now, are you allowing the fall sports to get together for practices?
No, we're
Okay.
not. Now, we do have some students that are getting together on their own and going to parks and getting together. That is not organized by a school. It's not organized by the coaches.
Okay, that's why I just want to make sure that the coaches weren't.
And they are not coming into our building and preparing or practicing for next year.
Okay, so I want to make sure.
Last thing I have here is I want to congratulate first our parent representatives who were elected in a landslide for SBDM.
That was so hard.
Marks and Ashley Gonzalez. It was unanimous. It's almost like a dictatorship here.
Do we both have one vote?
100% of the vote. I think it might have been 99-1. So it was pretty close this year, closer than it has been in the past. And then I also want to congratulate Miss Bushley. She won election tonight as again the vice chair, but she also won election for the next 2 years as our teacher representative in a landslide. So congratulations, Mrs. Bushley, Miss Gonzalez, Miss Sparks. In all seriousness, I'm very happy to work with each of you three. You make a great contribution to the betterment of our students in school, and I'm glad to be working with the three of you for the next 2 years, and Mrs. Guest and Mr. Campbell for another year and hopefully more. So it's good working with all you guys. I know we have the best interests of students at heart and trying our best to always try to live our mission, which is to increase student achievement. That's what SBDM is supposed to be about, and I know we're working diligently to do so. So thank you to each of you, and I'm glad to be working with you. And I appreciate your time this evening. I know it was a long night.
I'll make a motion to either extend or adjourn.
Adjourn.
Go with adjourn.
Whichever you want.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.